Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever hour of the day you are tuning in. This is the Blackout Live from New York with your host, Tasemere. If you're new to the segment, the purpose of this segment is to celebrate Black folks across the diaspora and to have an open dialogue about Black economics, how we reimagine trends in business, and explore the magic that we have. We have our reoccurring commutator, Kenyatta keep coming up here. She about to be a co-host. Kenyatta S. Rose of 6 Gen Venture Studio, right now headquartered in Colorado. Thank you for joining us so early this morning.
Woo, woo, good morning. Good morning. I wanted to pull something up real quick. I just was on my spirit to pull up a scripture real quick, if that's all right with you.
Of course. Let's get into it. What are we talking about today?
Well, if we could, can we just take 15 to 20 minutes to explore this topic? It's on my spirit heavy, and I know that we had something else in mind, but I just want to bring this up, and I promise you I'll tie it into what we originally discussed.
Yes, yes, yes.
But I wanted to discuss the power of inheritance.
Let's talk about it, which is so apropos because yesterday at the Black Wall Street Awards, Donnie actually came up to Harlem to honor some New York City folks that are doing amazing work. And there was someone in the audience. She wasn't receiving an award. I don't even think she was there necessarily.
I heard about her.
Someone, but she is an estate planner, and she was talking about the importance of folks really planning their estates, because oftentimes we don't have a will. We don't have any instructions on what we wanted to happen. We just thought people would just know and maybe figure it out amongst themselves, and things can end up in probate court for a really long time.
We're still in probate court.
And things like property, land, businesses can really get held up if you don't have clear instructions. So I think that this is a very timely conversation that is part of wealth generation as well, right? Like, how are you going to pass your wealth down? So take it away, Kenyatta.
So I was telling you backstage that I'm approaching my 2-year anniversary. Oh God, this is going to be so scary for me to even share this. I'm approaching my 2-year anniversary of living here in Colorado. September 20th will mark the second year. Although we came here in August. Before then, I was living with my mother, sleeping on her couch. I won't even go, I will save, there were some mental health issues that I was going through, but I will save that for another day, because I do think that we have to explore mental health in the Black community. Mm-hmm. Back when I was going through it, you were just called crazy. But now we've appropriately termed it mental health issues. But when I was going through it, was just like, you were just crazy, right? But suffice it to say, I was going through some really tough mental health issues and just was not in a really good space. And it took me time to pull myself out of that. But I want to start with this. So I'm approaching my second year of being in Colorado. And I want to share with you and your audience, this is one of my favorite scriptures in the Bible. I'm going to read to you, and I'm not doing this from the perspective of a Christian. I've actually renounced Christianity since my grandmother transitioned. And I'm now exploring more Africanized ways of spirituality. But I'm going to read to you guys Proverbs 13, chapter 13, verse 22. That's Proverbs chapter 13, verse 22. And it says, I'm not reading from King James also. The good person leaves an inheritance to his grandchildren, but the sinner's wealth will be stored up for the righteous one. I like the way that King James says it. King James Version says, a good man is a man who leaves an inheritance for his children and his children's children. And so that's my favorite scripture. That scripture is so important to me because, like I told you, this is my second year of being in Colorado. And before then, I was living with my mother. And you said that Eva is the hero. Is actually my grandma that's the real hero. So I'll tell you there's two reasons why my grandmother is the real hero in this story, and why I think it's so important to give veneration to veneration. Is that the right word? Am I using that? Veneration to our ancestors?
I think so.
I think that's the appropriate word, right? So a couple days leading up, I had bought a one-way ticket. I don't know if I told you this, but I bought a one-way ticket. We came here August 2020. And I did what you would call an exploratory trip to, like, because I had never been to Colorado. I had never met anyone. Well, I did, but I had never been here. And I didn't really know anybody who had been to Colorado, lived in Colorado. But my spirit just let me here. It said, come to Colorado. So I said, well, it's kind of crazy to just get up and move with a child to a place that you've never been to. So I said, let's come here for a week. Let me see how it feels for me. And then if it feels right, we'll move. Came here August 2020. It just felt right. I bought a one-way ticket. I didn't know how I was going to get back. I didn't know what. I just knew we came back to New York. Before we came back, I bought that one-way ticket coming back to Colorado for September 2020. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do it. I don't even have the money to do it. I just had enough money to buy a one-way ticket. And everything else was just like pure faith, right? So I bought the ticket to leave for September 20th, and I chose that date just because it was the cheapest date. And a week before the ticket, right, I'm clamoring. I also booked the hotel, mind you. Didn't have money for the hotel, just booked it, right? Right, so I'm like, well, dang, man, I don't got no money. I'm going to do this. I didn't promise my daughter that we was going to get out of here. It was a very tumultuous, very toxic environment. I mean, me and my mother, we're going back and forth. We're cursing each other out. I'm like, I got to get out of here. Like, I told you, I even got sick during the process of living with my mother, right? And I'm like, if I have to spend another year here, I won't make it. I just knew that. So it was like, we getting out of here. I don't know how. Hook or crook, we out, right? So a week before the flight, I have a dream, right? My grandmother comes to me in a dream. Now, I told you that I'm a compulsive saver. My mother is a compulsive spender, right? I also told you that my grandmother I consider her a very good steward over money. And I'm going to tie it back in a second. My grandmother comes to me. She says, in my dream, she says, remember the money that I left to your mother? She said, go and borrow the money from her. And then go borrow the money from her and then tell her that you'll pay her back when you get your tax refund. Just tell her, because I do my mother's taxes for the past 10 years. So she was like, just tell her that you'll pay her back when you get your tax refund. You'll just give her the whole thing. You'll pay her back with interest. You'll give her the whole thing. And she was like, it's a small price to pay. I woke up. I said, all right, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to borrow the money that my grandmother left to my mother when she transitioned, right? Like I said, my grandmother was an excellent steward over money. Multiple streams of income. For as long as I knew, my grandmother always had multiple streams of income. She was a traveler. She used her money. I'm not gonna say she spent her money. She used her money, but she also saved the money. Like, she somehow found the perfect balance in life. Use it, save it, invest it. And I'm talking about a woman I don't even think graduated from junior high school. I don't know how she knew this. She also had several life insurance policies. They weren't big policies. They were like small burial policies because that's just what they were selling to Black people at the time. Just enough, right? But she had several life insurance policies. Mind blowing. Like, I didn't even know she was moving like this until she transitioned. So I get up and I'm deciding I'm going to get this money from my mother that my grandma left her. Now, mind you, I told you my mother had been wanting to spend this money since she got it. We were having arguments like, I'm going to spend this money. I ain't leaving nobody nothing. It's my money. I'm like, but your mother left you an inheritance. Why would you not want to leave us an inheritance? They don't got nothing to do with me. That's her. You know, my grandmother transitioned when she was 73. So her thing was like, she worked all those years just to die at 73. So why should she leave? My mother was like, why should I leave? anybody, anything. And unfortunately, I hear a lot of Black American people talk like that. That I don't owe nobody shit. Excuse me. I'm sorry for cursing. I don't know anybody anything, and I'm not leaving anybody anything. Like, I hear way too many people talking like that, right? And that's why I was like on my spirit to have this conversation. So fast forward a couple days later, 2 or 3 days before our flight leaves, maybe 4, I start packing. And I'm crying in the living room. This is 3 days. I'm crying in the living room. And Eva's like, well, what's wrong? I'm like, we need the money to get to Colorado. And I need to borrow it from grandma, but I'm scared to ask her. Eva goes in the room and is like, we need $2,000 to get to Colorado. Get up off that money. So my mother comes. She like, we need this paper, grandma. And she was so adamant, and she had so much authority in her voice when she said it. I was so proud. Mother comes in, long story short, my mother comes in the living room. We're having a discussion. She's like, how you gonna move somewhere? You don't know nobody. You don't have a job. How's this gonna work? I'm like, I don't know, but it's gonna work. I don't know how it's gonna work. I'm just gonna make it work. Like, whatever it takes, hook or crook. We're going back and forth. An argument ensues. Fast forward, she ends up loaning me the money. I tell her, look, tax season comes up, you can take the whole thing. I'll pay you back with interest, which I actually ended up doing. But it was just on my spirit to talk about that because, one, I'm approaching the second, like I said, the 2nd year anniversary of being here. And 2, what enabled me to get here was money that my grandmother left my mother. That is the power of an inheritance. And this is why this scripture over time became my favorite scripture. Like, a good man is a man who leaves an inheritance for his children and his children's children. And I was having a conversation with a man that I met recently, and he was telling me how he had no intentions of leaving his children anything and how he didn't feel like it was his responsibility. And I told him my story. And I said, that is the power of an inheritance. And I could see how it really, I don't know if it changed him, but I could see that it landed on him. Mm-hmm. And I said, I don't think people realize just how powerful leaving money is. Imagine if my grandmother hadn't left that money. I would probably still, I wouldn't be, but I'm not even going to speak that into the universe. But because my grandmother had the foresight, my grandmother had the foresight to leave my mother. And not only my mother, all of her kids received an inheritance. But because my grandmother had the foresight to leave money to her children, it not only helped my mother, it helped me. Also, my grandmother ended up leaving a property. Now, I told you earlier, we didn't even know she owned the property, right? We didn't even know. Down south in Alabama, we're actually in probate. I told you that my mother was adamant about spending this money, and I just stayed on top of her, right? Like, I was like the enforcer accountant, right? You cannot spend this money, right? Fast forward. Now, mind you, I told you she was arguing me. I'm talking about we were having full-blown arguments about this money. Like, do not spend it. She's like, I want a Gucci bag. I'm like, you just bought a Gucci watch. You good. You don't need a Gucci bag. Found out my grandmother had a property in Alabama. Do you know that we've been able to use that money to fix up the property? And my mother came back last year. I should have screenshot the text. She thanked me for staying on top of her and not allowing her to spend that money, because now she's been able to take that money that my grandmother left her and improve the property. Now, this property was my great grandfather's property. So imagine the money that my grandmother left, right, is being used to renovate my great grandfather's home. So we're talking about my great grandfather who had a house, left it to my grandmother. My grandmother left money to my mother. We're using that to fix. So it's 2 generations of inheritance that literally is changing our lives. Before then, we were just like, it was just like an apartment, working just to get along. But 2 generations of inheritance is now influencing me and Eva, and it's likely going to influence her kids. That is the power of inheritance. So I think, one, we've got to start giving veneration to our ancestors, because our ancestors communicate with us from where they are. I don't know that there's a heaven. I don't know what happens after we pass on. I don't know. I do know that on several occasions I've had my uncle and my grandmother come and give me guidance when I could not figure it out on my own. So one, I think it's important to give veneration to our ancestors because they can help us in times of need. They can offer us guidance. And two, if you have an ancestor like my grandmother who's left you resources, why would you not give veneration and respect? So that was what I wanted to share with your audience. It was just on my spirit to share that.
Well, thank you for sharing it, because I do think that this is, as I shared with you, I think that this is a timely discussion, because inheritance, in my opinion, is part of wealth generation, right? Like in your instance, your grandmother left wealth that she had accumulated to her children, and your mom was able to support you in something that you wanted to do. So she actually is supporting 3 generations because you also have a daughter, right? So we think about the passing along of wealth, like true wealth, and how do we do that? And so this brings me always back into business, since we're always talking about business things, right? As we build these businesses, we need to start thinking about succession planning. We don't, as a group of people that own businesses, not Black, white, Hispanic, whatever, people don't usually think about succession planning if they are just doing the hustle and bustle of, I just want to have a business, right? They're like, I'm just going to do it. I don't really, people will figure it out.
Or the fact that you need life insurance to even fund that.
Exactly. So now when you're thinking about Black folks and their businesses, don't really have the information of what is really necessary. I'm always feeling like the tools to really build strong, sustainable businesses that will have the opportunity to pass down. Ask Black founders if they have a financial advisor. Most people don't. They don't even have it for their personal life, right? So they usually won't have it for their business life. So they wouldn't even know that in order to like really pass this business down, you have to have a succession plan that's financed by a separate life insurance policy, right? This is getting deep here, because if you are the founder and you're taking a salary, you now have to say, somebody, whether they're related to me or my family is going to hire another CEO, you have to pay this person. How are you going to afford to keep this company running without the life insurance policy? Or you just, thinking that one of your kids or one of your siblings are just going to take up the mantle? You probably haven't even left a plan together, right? Like everything lives in your brain. It's not written down. You haven't taken the time to train up the next person to step into these shoes. So the people just sell it. They're like, it either just goes away because nobody really knows how to operate this business, or your family will just sell it because they're like, I don't want to be bothered with this business. I don't understand it. This is not my thing. Let's just sell it. But let's even say that they do sell it, because that's an exit strategy. What is the plan once you sell it though? Right? Like is that going to spur another business idea? Because really the wealth is in creating businesses and ownership of things, right? So we don't have that, then what are you really passing down in a meaningful way? Like, so for me, to be completely honest, like I have a trust for my kid. Like I have been very much, and I have talked to you about like, oh my gosh, like now that I have a kid, I need to seriously think about like, how do I have a trust fund for my kid? Like, what do I put in it? How do I start it? How do I finance it? What do I write in there?
Tasemere, are you familiar with the Rockefeller method?
No.
Okay, I'm going to do 2 plugs right now. One, 6th Gen and myself, one of the things that I'm very intentional about is sitting down and not only working with founders to scale their companies, but to also um, ensure the longevity of their companies, leveraging the power of life insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to do a quick plug. There's this book called "What Would a Billionaire Do?" I'm going to send you the link. Read this book. Like, it's 138 pages. Yeah. The Rockefeller method is doing exactly what you're talking about. You start a trust. So people have wondered, like, how have the Rockefellers maintained their wealth for so long? How do you think they've maintained their wealth for so long? If you
Me?
had to guess, yeah.
If I had to, I think it's in having trust funds and wills. I think that it is like strategically planning how you pass this down, but I also think it's in educating your children. You know, like you're educating along the way of like, this is what we own and this is how we keep it in our family.
Okay, that's a fair answer. One of the biggest things that they've used is life insurance. Life
Mm-hmm.
insurance, literally. So what happens is, let's say you have your baby. The first thing that you do is you get a policy for your child, a whole
Mm-hmm.
life, or you can get something like IUL, Index Universal Life, which is pegged to the stock market. Okay. That money is growing over time, right? Let's say the child wants to start their own business or they want to go to college. What they'll do is they'll put together a proposal or a pitch, submit it to whomever's in charge of the trust. So the trust is actually the beneficiary. So when the child is born, their trust is the beneficiary to their life insurance policy.
Mm-hmm.
So two things happen. One, they're accumulating cash value, and that cash value allows them to pursue whatever venture that they have. If they can't pay the money back, when that person passes on, transitions, their trust receives an inheritance from the life insurance policies. So literally the Rockefellers and generations of people, banks do this. They leverage life insurance to, one, fund their trust, and two, fund their business ventures. And every time, we know, people are going to do what? People are going to die. Like, that's just a part of living, right? You die. You come here, you die. So imagine generations of purchasing life insurance policies, right? And then the person dies, their child now becomes a beneficiary of that trust. You do the same thing. You just keep repeating the formula.
But I want to add that it's not just purchasing small policies.
Oh, substantial amounts.
Right?
Oh, yes. Yes,
like,
very substantial.
And I think that is also a misnomer of people get the bare minimum. They don't get what they don't push the envelope to what they can actually get. Like most people could probably get like $1 million plus on a life insurance policy, right? But most people might only do 20,000 or 10,000 or 5,000.
Why do you think that people are doing that?
One, I think people don't know. So when you don't have a financial advisor or someone that can give you the right information, you just repeat what you saw other people do. That's one. Two, I think people go with what the market rate says you need for a funeral, and they're just going to do that because they're like, I don't want to pass. I don't want to leave. It's this mentality of, I don't want anyone to benefit off
ding,
of
ding, 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 ding.
Right?
That's the major one.
Going to get the bare minimum, and that's like all people need to do is just put me away, right? Like either cremate me, bury me, how much ever that's going to cost. I'm only covering that cost, right? I'm not leaving any money behind to for people to go out and shop, for people to go out. I want to enjoy all my money while I have it, and I don't want this to go towards the premiums of keeping this insurance policy going. But the downfall of that is you don't leave anything really behind, right? To do something that your grandmother was able to do, but you really, your great grandfather actually set this all in motion because he had the property that he left to your grandmother. Your grandmother said, okay, I'm going to leave this property to my kids. So it's like the foresight of like planning that you are going to have heirs, right? And you need to take care of these people. And this is part of your legacy that you are also going to be leaving behind, that you get to keep something in your family line. I think is super important. And I think that it's foresight of like, I'm willing to make whatever the monetary sacrifice is right
And
now.
Tasemere, let me just say, my grandmother didn't even make huge sacrifices. She traveled every year.
Yeah, but it was still a sacrifice. It was still like, I'm going to put this money aside, because most people would say, I don't want to do that, right?
Well,
like,
when I say she didn't sacrifice, I mean she didn't sacrifice the quality of the life that she wanted to live. She shopped. When I say her closets, man, we have to throw away everything. Like give not throw it away, but give it away. Like she had a closet full of clothes, right? She traveled, right? She had stamps on her passport, right? She went on cruises. So she was able to leave an inheritance. And I want to put the emphasis on that because people often think when they hear sacrifice, they hear, I have to give up something that I really want. And no, you don't have to do that. It really,
if you plan properly, and this is why I think it's all about planning, right? Like, someone told me this. I wish I would remember who said this to me, but someone told me you need to have, when you want something, you need to think about how are you going to finance that. Like, how is that going to be? So like, is your business going to finance you being able to do this or whatever? Do you need to have another entity that finances all these? Like, you need to get into the process of not just thinking about the current money that you have, but what new things can you imagine to finance this thing that you want? And the more you think about how is this going to be financed, the easier it becomes because you already have it in your head. Like, I want to go on and people do this all the time, right? Like, I want to go on vacation. Maybe you have a separate savings account that you're like, this savings account is going to finance me going on this yearly vacation that we do. Or people have credit cards that they rack up points on, and the points are going to pay for the airfare, or the points are going to pay for the hotel. So this is how I'm going to finance going here or doing that. That's being intentional about like, what resources do you have that can finance how you do something else. So it becomes less of a burden of you feeling like, I have to eat Franks and pork and beans for 4 months in order for me to do this. It's like, no, you don't. You just have to sit down and think about how can you move something along that's still in your budget.
right. Well, yeah, I definitely, I appreciate that mindset. I think it's a boss mindset. I think it's a very strategic mindset, and one does need to practice thinking strategically. Um, I just wanted to just emphasize that somehow my grandmother was able to have it all, right? I think probably the last thing that she didn't get to do was purchase a brownstone in Brooklyn because we are from Lafayette Gardens projects. So that's probably the last thing. And I blame myself for that, but that's another conversation. But she was still able to do all the things that she wanted to do and leave an inheritance. And I think oftentimes people think that it's one or the other, and it's not. It's possible to do all of it. You don't have to give up anything in the way of sacrificing your wants and desires for the present. My grandma didn't do that. Like I said, she traveled, she shopped, like she tithed. Tithing was very important to her. So you really don't have to give up anything in the way of like, but she also created multiple streams of income, right? She had multiple streams of income. She was always thinking about, like you said, what are the different ways I could bring in money? She was always thinking like that. So to your point, so she did have that mindset about how am I going to bring in money to do these things? But in
So
terms of like
how do
giving
you
up,
think people should get started? Like, what if there's, like, we know because we
call me.
talk
Call
to
me.
each other often, right? We talk to each other often. We talk about what does it mean to build real wealth and how do you secure it to be able to pass it down? Because I think that there's a lot of misinformation on a lot of different platforms of folks talking about, like, you can just do it like this, right? But with
Give me an example of
so,
what
like,
you think is misinformation.
Okay, I'll give you one that I think is a little complicated that I think sounds great, but I think could cause some challenges. So now I see a lot on different platforms talking about, if you own a business, pay your children a salary from the business, right? Because you'll be able to write that off on your taxes. And while I think that that might sound great, just having that thrown out there, I think that tax code is very complicated. And I think that unless you really understand how these taxes are moving around and the responsibility of the person. So for instance, I'm expanding, right? And I had to call my CPA and I said, do I pay this person that is in college as an independent contractor, or do I pay her as a W-2 employee and withhold the taxes? Now, I could have had the option to say, I don't want to pay the taxes for her, right? So I'm just going to, like, screw her over, have her become a independent contractor and let her figure it out. I'm going to report it on my Schedule C and then she'll have to figure it out. But then if I did that, it's not like evading taxes, is that they're going to come after her for the taxes that she probably wouldn't even know what the heck she had to do or anything like that, right? So we said, okay, I have to do the more ethical thing, right? And pay her as a W-2 employee, which means that now I have to find a payroll processing service. That's likely going to cost me a fee, right? To set it up and to move the money through that way. So I think when people say certain things, it's a whole process.
I don't think that's ethical. I think that's a growth mindset.
It's like a whole process behind that you have to really understand. Like, it's one thing to just say, just pay somebody, just pay your kids as an employee in the business. But then what happens when your kid has to eventually file taxes, right? What does that really look like for them? Or what happens when they are applying for college and now it says that they have an income, right? So now what numbers do you use on those FAFSA forms? I just think that you just can't take things at face value because someone is just giving the blanket advice that could work in certain instances but could not work in other instances, and then you figure out that you almost screwed yourself over. Like, you thought you were doing something correctly, and then maybe 10 years down the line your kids need to move into this other section of life, and now what you've been doing for the past 10 years is going to impact, like, what they have access to because you took the wrong advice. That's all I'm saying, is that it just sounds like a good idea, but I don't know how well that pans out in different instances of what it is that you want to do, especially if you yourself don't understand tax code. That's why you go get a CPA, right? That's why you're like, I'm going to go hire a CPA. I'm going to go talk to someone
That specializes in tax code.
That understands tax code, that understands business, because that's what, the people that folks are trying to emulate, they just think oftentimes that this is one person. They don't see that there's a whole team of people that are being paid to run this entity the way that it's being ran, right? Like billionaires, I'm sure, have accountants, they have CPAs, they might have multiple people that are like watching this money. They might also have multiple attorneys, they have bankers. It's a whole team behind this one entity that is housing all of this information to make certain decisions. And what we see is the outcome, but we don't necessarily see the thought process behind why something happens the way that it does. We just see that this person has a lot of money and doing whatever, but we don't know the actual team that gave them that advice or that said, okay, listen, you gonna make too much money as your LLC right now. You're gonna have to pay too much money in taxes. What we're gonna do is we're gonna convert this LLC to a corporation because we're gonna save on the taxes this way, and then we're gonna buy some property. Like those are the conversations that people are having and building the wealth, but we don't necessarily know that. So we're just emulating things that we don't completely understand, and we don't have the team.
So how does one solve that?
I think they should call us. I'm just gonna say that. I think that they should call us. But let's say somebody doesn't want to call us to go through it. I think it is really getting out of your own way, to be quite honest. I think that some folks feel like most of the answers lie with them and they don't want to trust anyone else to help guide them through what they need to do. But it's going to be very hard to be as successful as you would like to be if you don't find your team. And that doesn't mean that you need to find all the pieces at one time, but you need to start with a piece and you need to commit to learning and trusting, whoever you are going to get the information from, and understand that as you grow, there's more pieces to this puzzle for you to try to figure out. In the beginning, when I started the DM firm, I didn't know that I was going to end up getting a trust. I didn't know that. I mean, I started the DM firm. It was something that I did in addition to my full-time job. I didn't even know I was going to transition into being a full-time founder. And then I became a full-time founder and I was like, okay, let me just focus on growing my business. But as you grow, there's certain responsibilities that you have: workers' compensation, employee disability insurance. You have to figure out, you realize at some point you don't have the same 401k that people have on their jobs. So now you're like, am I going to be working my business for the rest of my life? Or am I going to eventually retire? How do you retire as a founder? What does that look like? So I said, oh, I don't know the answers to these questions. I probably need to get a financial advisor because I also don't want to do all the research, practically go back to school for finance to teach myself this. I need to find a financial advisor, found one, and then started slowly putting a plan together to say, as I grow, this triggers this. Okay, once I do this, then this is going to trigger this, and the next step is going to be this, and the next step is going to be this. And then she gave me additional resources. Okay, so now the business is growing in this way. You did have legal, but that legal isn't going to serve you as you're continuing to grow. You actually need this other kind of attorney because this is where it seems like you want to go. Hired a new attorney, right? Talk to the attorney for a few months. And then I was like, okay, people are asking me this question. How do I manage this? Which led me to a new banker. I had a banker, but my banker wasn't the proper banker that I needed to answer other types of questions. So now it was, you need a new type of banker, because now what you're asking, the person that you currently have doesn't have the expertise. Now so it's always a growing into what you need, but you also have to be open to what these new needs are as you grow. And then if you have a family that you are intentional about securing, this goes back into the inheritance. Then you have to start to think about, at what point do you start to think about how do you secure your assets, right? Like, who are you going to groom? What does that look like? How are you going to pay this person? What if you got hit by a bus tomorrow? Do you want your business to die with you in the bus? Or do you want somebody else to pick it up? Like, who's your advisory team? Who are you telling? Who are you like giving this information to that can grow? And most of the time I joke, my nephew who's 8 has known my passwords since he was like 3. And so I have directed people, like, you need to know how to get into this, and this. Like, go ask my nephew, because he's the person that knows the passwords. In the beginning, I was teaching my nephew from 3. This is what TT does. Somebody needs to know where this is where this is at. And that was the person that I had originally selected to groom into understanding my business. Now that I have Elijah, I am now grooming him from 1 to try to, you have to select these people. But I know a 1-year-old and an 8-year-old can't run my company. Like, I'm smart enough to know that, right? But I know that they have some information that they could tell an adult. But now you have to figure out, like, who would you trust in your circle that if something happened to you, they know enough about your business to help hire someone to replace you and then manage that person. I think we have to think about that.
Well, 2 things I would add, and I'll let you proceed. I would say, I would hope at this point, and I'm really evangelizing this in the body of work that I'm now becoming more intentional about myself, is that we start to build companies that can run without us. Because I think we've been so focused on business building, we haven't been focused on company building.
I agree with that. I agree, because most businesses, they are single employee.
Yeah. Well, 98% of Black businesses in this country are solopreneurs.
And I'm wondering, I have been thinking about, why is that the case, right? We own a business, but not necessarily a company. What is holding us back as a collective on creating companies? I know that 6 Gen has the solution to that.
Well, that's the work that I'm exploring. I've been fascinated with this work for a very long time. 1, how does a business become a company? How does Henry Ford get the idea for the assembly line? And then, he didn't invent the car, but he, mastered the assembly line. And then out of that, a whole enterprise was built. So I'm looking at how businesses have become companies, and how do we now, I'm reading a book called African American Management, so that because I think one of the things that we're struggling with is, 1, we don't have a memory of entrepreneurship. Okay, that's obvious. We've all been told to get a good job with benefits. But 2, I think that the way that America does capitalism is not really natural for us. I don't think it's something that is aligned with who we are as a people. My friend jokes that we're a different species from everybody else. And at first we're cracking up because it's kind of funny, but when you think about it, like, we are different from everybody else, right? When you go to Japan, okay, yes, they've embraced aspects of capitalism, but they still have their own way. I forget what it's called, their version of management. And you've had companies here that have tried to replicate that, right? So they're still doing business. It starts with the letter S. I got to go back into some of my management books. I'm going to be really immersing myself to some of this stuff. But they have their own way of managing their companies, right? But they still show up successfully on the global stage, right? Because you're doing, you know, when you meet them, there's a certain way that they hand you have to, I think you have to collect their business card with the left hand and shake with the right, or is it the reverse? And when you see them, you bow, and there's a certain way that you collect their business cards. Like, so they're doing business, but it's coming from a place that's aligned with who they are as a people. And I think that we haven't really figured that out, is how do we do business in a way that's aligned with us? So for me, it's not only understanding the strategies that companies have employed, but I'm now saying I think we need to go a little bit deeper.
Mm-hmm.
And so the book that I'm reading now, African American Management History, it talks about that because of who we are as a people, we have to do things from a cooperative point of view.
Well,
So
I'm going to say I agree with that because, well, you already know how I do my business coaching is not necessarily traditional ideas around how to move your models forward. But I think to build on that point, I think even from the ideation phase of how we operate is different. You know, I often say that one thing that people always ask is, who is your customer? And people give like a very generic, my customers are women from 20 to 40 and they make $70,000 a year, right? And for some groups of people, that's enough. Like that's enough for them to maybe get to that customer, right? Like they can just do basic demographics. They live here, they do this. When we are thinking about building our businesses and finding our customer, you cannot find your customer in generic ways. And I think that we have to understand that the way in which we choose to build our business that transitions into a company, which is the work that you're doing, is not going to be the same as how other groups do it, because we have a different, we have to have a different formula of how we remain successful in what we're trying to do and what skill sets do we pull on. And every skill set isn't necessarily going to be a formal educational skill set. Sometimes you have to pull on the skill sets that you learn from just wherever you grew up, where however you grew up.
Some of the best entrepreneurs were former drug dealers.
Yeah, wherever you grew up, however you grew up, the neighborhood that you grew up in, the schools that you went to, sometimes you have to dig into your memory to figure out, well, how did you even make friends in grade school? Like, what was that like? What did you do? How did you do that? Because maybe that's part of how you sell, right? Like you have to figure out your own flavor and dynamic that comes most natural to you, because I know that this word is overused, which is being your most authentic self. But people know when you're not showing up as you. Like they know that. They feel it. They might not tell you, but they know that. So when you don't show up as you and all of that you have, how do you get somebody to pay you?
And Tasemere, what I want to add to that, you spoke about going back in history. I would say, in addition to doing that work, I'm now understanding, based on some pages that I went through yesterday in this book, African American Management Histories, that as a people, as founders, Black founders, Black entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, the whole gamut, those who take entrepreneurship very seriously as their life, to go back and see how Black companies have historically, companies like North Carolina, North Carolina Mutual. I'm forgetting one word. It's actually four words. Atlanta Mutual, Reginald Lewis, Madam C.J. Walker, Annie Malone, who actually came before Madam C.J. Walker, actually gave her the formula, but she unfortunately isn't. Madam C.J. Walker was a better salesperson, so that's why we know about her. But we need to go back and see how these companies, because if they could become successful companies in a much more difficult atmosphere that existed back then, if we can study what they've done to be successful and do it our way, because they did it their way, right? They weren't looking at what the whites were doing, right? Because they were largely held out, right? They were blocked out. So they had to do it their own way. And I think that we've been trying to do it Bill's way, when in fact, like you said, we've got to go back into our memory and say, you know what, how did they do it? And how can we incorporate what they've done in addition to incorporating best practices and new ways of being?
I will also want to add finding new entrepreneur founder friends and relationships, because the people that you surround yourself with on a daily, I'm not even going to say a weekly because that's not enough, on a daily basis, right? Like other founders that you feel are doing it, like they are doing what they need to do, they are staying on their square, they are figuring it out. Like you need to surround yourself with other folks that are doing dynamic work, that you can also pick their brains around how did they do something. And that is a genuine relationship, right? Like you also are going to reciprocate, and you're also going to share how you did something, because everyone can't read
Find your tribe
in the universe, right? But the tribe in this instant isn't your customer. It's really like your colleague, right? Like I spend hours talking to you a week. I spend hours talking to Annette a week. I also have business coaches. We all have business coaches, and we all share. Someone told me to do it like this.
Yeah.
Someone told me to do it like this. This is a resource. We're sharing resources. We're sharing strategy. If I do something really well and you ask me, how did I get in that room? I'll tell you, you're really crafty at getting yourself in certain spaces. And we share that information with each other, because iron sharpens iron, right? Like maybe I can't do it the same way that you do it. I have to figure out my own style and flavor of how I get in the room and how I stay in the room. But we also are constantly sharing pieces to this puzzle that we have essentially figured out in a particular industry. That may or may not overlap into another industry, but it's good information. And I'm always going to say, when I went to that conference in Atlanta, I was almost like a 6th gen employee. Okay, I was like, I'm sitting in the room, I'm taking notes. I'm like, oh shoot, this is not for the DM firm or for me. This is for Kenyatta. I'm sitting there taking notes. I'm like texting you on breaks. Kenyatta, you got to go look up this, and this. This person just mentioned this, and this. This is kind of like what we spoke about, but you have to, make time to invest in your own network, I think, too. And I think that sometimes that's a piece that we think we have to do it all by ourselves.
I think that is probably our biggest, for lack of a better word, downfall, is that we often tend to work in silos. And so I've been thinking a lot about how do we start to break down these silos and create one big silo, one big ecosystem, as you would say, and to start to do this work together.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty confident that we're doing that. And there are spaces, like there are rooms where Black founders are coming together. I've stumbled into a couple of them, like, oh, you guys are here this whole time. Oh, okay. But I agree with you, like doing that more often and making it a part of who we are, making it instinctual, making it like the normal course of doing business. Like,
mm-hmm.
And I think we need a consortium, right? That needs to come next, right? But I guess that's our next conversation.
Yeah, how do we build that? Because I was talking about that on the last show of like, how do we How do we buy in like massive quantities to, you know, say this is our actual spending power and this is what we're going to do. And as
start harnessing that,
we have to bring Quan back into this conversation because he has a lot of thoughts on how Black men can help propel Black women forward in business endeavors also.
Yes, Quan actually lives by that. Like, all of our families grew up together, but once we reconnected, my life just took on, like, he really added so much fuel to me. Cause like, that's not a thought for him. Like, that's literally who he is. He does that work. Like, he's invested in me. I've seen him invest in other women. He's definitely put a lot of backing in me. Like, I ran for office. He invested in my flyers. He was outside handing out the flyers, helping me shake hands, kiss babies. I didn't kiss any babies, but I ran and I won too. Like, I won. It wasn't by a landslide, but I definitely won. And it was Quan's support that helped me achieve that. So yeah,
we definitely need to have him back because he definitely motivates me. Like, he's like, no, they're not going to say that to you. They said what to you? Like, what did, like, bring me in on the next meeting. What are they talking about? What, they don't understand. They don't understand your source that you got right here. They don't understand this. What's going on? And I think that we need that. I know that I appreciate that because oftentimes I feel like I'm an alien. I'm foreign in these spaces that I'm going into, and the things that I dream sometimes scare the heck out of me, but I know that it scares the people that I'm telling as well. And sometimes you feel, or I feel like, are they going to get it? And do they know that I can actually do all the things that I'm saying I can do?
I think if you believe it, they'll believe it.
So having Quan to like put that battery in your back and remind you of like what you've already accomplished, because sometimes you need your team, your tribe, your squad, whatever you're going to call your day ones, whatever you're going to call them, to remind you of like what you've already been able to do.
You got to have cheerleaders. Like, everybody, and that's another thing too. Like, everybody keeps saying you got to have your tribe, and you do got to have your tribe, right? Like, that's a must. But what I don't hear people saying is you got to have cheerleaders. Mm-hmm. Like, I've intentionally surrounded myself. One of the things, because I used to have extremely low self-esteem. I'm talking about notoriously low self-esteem. Like, if you tried to measure it on a self-esteem scale, it probably wouldn't even show up. And what I had to learn to do is, one of my dreams, I always dreamt of having a father. Like, some people are okay with not having had a father. For me, it always kind of bothered me. I always wish that I had a father. And so I've been very intentional with surrounding myself with male energy. Well, it doesn't even matter like what they do. As long as they provide me and they help boost that confidence in me, I'm good. And Quan is one of those people. And those who don't qualify, I'll just cut them off. But like, I've been very intentional about pulling or attracting male cheerleaders into my life. And for me, like, I need that, right? Like, I think Black women especially, we need that. And if you're someone, I'm probably gonna get some backlash for saying this, but if you're someone who grew up without a father and you feel that loss, I would say be very intentional. And you're not married. If you're not married, you're single, you go without a father, you feel that loss, I would say be very intentional about surrounding yourself with male friends that act as cheerleaders in your life. Because as human beings, we need that. Mm-hmm. I know that we've been trained to think that we don't. And that's another thing that I'm studying too, is like, what gaps exist for us as entrepreneurs that we need to fill. So yeah, I would end it on that. If you're a woman who grew up without a father and you don't have a spouse, be very intentional about pulling a male cheerleaders into your life, and you're gonna see it's going to make a hell of a lot.
It's so different. So yeah. I have had a different, I guess, history than Kenyatta, but I still feel like that male backing is so pivotal for me. Like, most people know that I'm super close with my brother. He's 12 years older than me. He probably was my best friend before I even knew I had a best friend. I tell him things that sisters probably don't even tell their brothers. But I feel like being able to call the men in my life and say, this is what I'm going through, and to have them back me and know that when I'm walking into certain spaces, I know that if somebody says something crazy to me, I have at least like 5 strong males in my corner that I can call to like rejuvenate that confidence that maybe somebody tried to take from me, because my community is behind me in a very intimate way, makes a difference. Like, I know I can call my brother, I know I can call Quan, I know I can call Fregis, I know I can call Donnie, right? I just named 4 people off the top of my head that I know, and there's more that I can call to say, like, somebody just told me this. Do you think that that was true? and they're like, show up. Where do I need to show up at? Like, because we're about to fight. Somebody said what? They did what? Like, that's not going down. I think that as a woman, that energy is definitely necessary.
As a Black woman, you need that, because the world is constantly trying to diminish our light, and we are goddesses.
It's definitely necessary to keep us motivated and to stay the course, and not get so deflated.
Find your cheerleaders, guys. Not just your tribe.
Yeah, you gotta find those.
Find you some cheerleaders.
Find those people that's willing to pull up. They like, I'll get on a plane. I'll get in the spaceship. Just send me your location. I'm there. What's going on?
Like, it's good to have homegirls, but that male energy hit different. I don't know, something about that testosterone, man. It just hit different.
Thank you, Kenyatta. Our time is up. This went by so fast. Kenyatta's about to be a co-host, y'all. She don't know it yet. Or maybe she knows. I don't know. These conversations are amazing. Today we talked about the importance of inheritance. Kenyatta shared her own history, story.
That was very vulnerable for me.
Yeah, around inheritance and how that has changed, that parlayed into business. Having more, what do we call it? I'm forgetting the name right now. Succession planning for our businesses, and the male energy is needed, guys. We need that. Don't believe us when we say we don't need it.
I need a man. I don't know all this. I don't need no man. I need a man. I don't know what you got going on. I need a man.
This has been the Blackout Live from New York with your host Tasemere and my commutator Kenyatta S. Rose. See you next week. Ciao.
See you next week.